Professor Dr. Farid Sufyan Shoaib, Dean Ahmad Ibrahim Kulliyyah of Laws at International Islamic University, Malaysia. Professor Dr. Muhammad Hashim Kamali, founding CEO of International Institute of Advanced Islamic Studies, IAIS Malaysia. And Professor Dr. Najiba Muhammad Zain, Professor Dr. Abdul Ghafur Hamid, Professor Dr. Muhammad Nakib Isan Jain, and also Associate Professor Dr. Muhammad Tahir Sabit Haji Muhammad are the panelists for the roundtable discussion today from Ahmad Ibrahim Kulliyyah of Laws, International Islamic University, Malaysia, and also Assistant Professor Dr. Arich Tolga is the director of this roundtable discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and very good morning. It is my great pleasure and as well honor to be the moderator of this roundtable discussion today, which entitled Return of Taliban. What would be the legal and humanitarian implications? Without further ado, please kindly allow me to invite Professor Dr. Farid Sufyan Shoaib, Dean of Ahmad Ibrahim Kulliyyah of Laws, to deliver his welcoming remarks.
Thank you, Dr. Hassad. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I think the people of Afghanistan has suffered decades of war, and they are approaching the winter and may face severe drought, and they may run out of food by the end of the month, and not to mention the situation about COVID-19 pandemic. Because of this dire situation in Afghanistan, Ahmad Ibrahim Kulliyyah of Laws feels that it is important to highlight the humanitarian crisis and provide clarity on the related international law principles regarding the ongoing development in Afghanistan. If we look at the history, the Soviet had invaded Afghanistan in the late December 1979 and remained in Afghanistan until mid-February 1989, from 1979 to 1989. And the war in Afghanistan became a quagmire for the disintegrating Soviet Union by the late 1980s. And it is said that the Soviet suffered some 15,000 casualties and many more were injured. Then we had the 9/11 and the hunt for Al-Qaeda by the United States of America. This led to the United States of America invasion in 2001 of Afghanistan. Of course, this includes also the invasion of Iraq in 2003 for the hunt for the yet to be found weapon of mass destruction. The invasion of Afghanistan ended recently after 20 years of conflict. It is estimated that Washington spent over USD $2 trillion on the Afghan conflict. United Kingdom spent USD 30 billion. German spent USD 19 billion. So those are, in some perspective, the cost. If you look at the casualty from the 2 decades of war, we have the loss of life of 2,300 US soldiers, 450 UK soldiers, and you have more than 21,000 injuries. Of course, these figures of the casualties and the injury is dwarfed by what the people of Afghanistan themselves suffered. By some estimates, you have more than nearing 100,000 of casualties in the military, in the police, in the civil war. More than 100,000 of civilian casualties. Internally displaced people of 3 million. Refugees, 3 million refugees of Afghanistan. And the impact on the neighboring countries. Some estimates 1.5 million in Pakistan and 800,000 in Iran, or other estimates that 5 million of refugees in the 2 neighboring countries. We should also not forget that even with the withdrawal of the invasion force, the killing continued. We have heard reports of killing among Afghans. We have heard the killing of Zemari Ahmadi's family of 10, including children, by the US drone strike in Afghanistan on 29th August 2021. So we have heard that the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres calls for states to assist 11 million people who may face the serious possibility of complete economic collapse after decades of war and the invasion of the Soviet and then the United States of America. Hopefully, today's event will contribute to the appreciation and understanding of the dire humanitarian needs of Afghanistan. The product not only because of the withdrawal of the United States and the return of the Taliban, but because of the decades of war from invasions by the Soviet, United States, and the Civil War. Moving forward, we want to look from the international law perspective, the return of the Taliban as forming the government of Afghanistan, because certainly the Afghan people need a semblance of normalcy to continue their life with dignity. We want also to consider our repeated worries included in the remark of the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres in the high-level ministerial meeting about the fate of the women and children of Afghanistan, which are the most vulnerable groups in any war and in any armed conflict. We are fortunate to have eminent speakers today. We have Professor Dr. Muhammad Hashim Kamali, a well-regarded and well-renowned figure with regards to the situation in Afghanistan, particularly the constitution and the laws and the Sharia. We have Prof. Nakib, we have Dr. Tahir, and we have Prof. Najiba that would shed lights on the humanitarian and international perspective. So hopefully, the speakers would provide some first-hand knowledge of the situation on the ground, the situation of Afghanistan in general, and the indigenous perspective on the humanitarian, social, and structural condition in Afghanistan. When I met students from Afghanistan, who are always known for their kindness and hospitality, always sharing with me the dried grapes, or we call it kismis, almonds and honey that they brought from their hometown or from their own orchard. They were proud of the local produce of Afghanistan that they managed to grow and nurture in between the pockets of peace and tranquility that they managed to find. This is the Afghanistan that we want to see, an Afghan with hope. This is Afghanistan that we want to help to rebuild, irrespective of the ideology of the government of the day. Because at the end, we are all human who will treat each other with dignity if we so treat them with the same. At the end, all of us came from Adam. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you so much, Prof, for your one welcoming remark. And please kindly allow me to make a short announcement to our respected participants. If you have any question during the panel session, please kindly post the question in the chat box by identifying whom you would like to answer the question later on. Inshallah, during Q&A session, I will be collecting the relevant question from the chat box and will be directing to the respective panelists. Ladies and gentlemen, regardless of political, racial, religious, and social issues, people across the world, they are stunned by the sudden announcement made by the President of the United States to withdraw the US forces from Afghanistan. Since then, of course, as we have all witnessed, the Taliban has been advancing to take over the administrations of Afghanistan. By now, of course, we can say that safely, Afghanistan is in de facto control of Taliban.
Dr. Hassan, please unmute yourself.
Sorry. So let's invite our first panelist, Associate Professor Dr. Muhammad Tahir Sabit Haji Muhammad, to deliver his panel talk on overview of the current situation in Afghanistan, a humanitarian perspective. Please, Prof.
Boleh, tak ada masalah. Sepul dengan Honda Arif. Better. Kredibel sikit. Sepul tak pernah dah. Sepul dekat sampai operasi. Operasi. Dia operasi. 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 So aku dah WhatsApp dia tu boleh kita meeting.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullah.
Okay. It seems that I cannot share my slides with you guys.
Can see the slide.
Can see.
Yes.
You can see the slides, Professor.
Yes, we can see your slides.
I see, but I cannot see it. That's the problem. Okay. 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 Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alamin wa aqibatul muttaqin wa salatu wa salam ala ashrafil anbiya'i wal mursalin wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. Amma ba'd. Honorable Dean, honorable professors who are panels to the forum, professors, associate professors, doctors, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My topic is on overview of the current situation in Afghanistan, a humanitarian overview. Let me a little bit enlarge the topic because the issues are connected with the humanitarian situation. Those issues which are connected with is the recognition or legitimacy of the government, the issue of sovereignty or independence with the invasion and restriction and the government which is supposed to be recognized. So Afghanistan at that level and the Taliban government at that level, they are fulfilling the condition of international law. But under international law, we know the recognition of a state or the government, even though they fulfill all the condition, the precondition for the recognition, they are not under obligation to recognize it. So this rule on the recognition or the lack of obligation of other state to recognize, this opens the door to the state, the newly formed states, not to fulfill their obligation or to have rights on the international level. They may not be able to contribute to the development of their state. The states which they do not recognize the newly formed government or state, they may be willing to intervene or invade the given country because it is not recognized. They may impose economic sanctions. They may impose some condition on aid, and they also can prevent investment from the given state. So the state which is newly formed, it may not be able to perform all its obligation, both locally and internationally. So from this perspective, Afghanistan has been the subject of two invasions, one by the Russians and one by the Americans in 2001. And now the current government of Afghanistan, or the Taliban's government, which is not recognized. Sanctions are imposed, and therefore investment, commercial transaction cannot be carried out. The Taliban have inherited a government that was marred by anarchy, by civil war, and non-compliance with Islamic law, until to the extent that someone has to marry even a boy. And as a result, the Taliban came. The Taliban came insisting on the implementation of Islamic law. In the beginning, the Talibans were not well educated. They were all of them mostly half educated in the Islamic law and in the informal schools and village seminaries. Nevertheless, they were very rigid Hanafis, Maturidis, and anti-Wahhabis. They were very close to Ijtihad, do not accept Ijtihad and Tajdeed. Independent-minded, they were independent-minded, and they were not exposed to governance and principle and norms of international relations. So they insisted what they knew best, and whoever tells them not to do it, they will not accept. They were the de facto government of Afghanistan of almost 90%. In the beginning, Americans were happy with them. They thought they can deal with the Taliban just like Saudi Arabia. Some commercial projects were underway. Bin Laden, CIA, and ISI were their neighbors with each other. However, this marriage did not continue until Bin Laden has to start war in America. The Saudis, they cut their relation. The Americans, they have bombarded Afghanistan. And as a result, the commercial deal, which was supposed to be concluded between American company and Taliban, was not continued. Instead, the project was given to an Argentinian company, Bedas. Is this thing happen? Feminists and human rights organization war started against the Taliban, and they were accused of brutal treatment of the citizens, killing of Afghan civilians. They were accused of policy of scorched earth, burning houses, civilian houses. They were executing murderers, stoning adulterers. They had banned the artwork, prevented girls and women from work and education. Some of this allegation may be true, others may be mixed of falsehood, half-truth, or distortion. Even those allegations which were investigated, the investigation was not, from social sciences perspective, reliable. As a result of civil war and the Taliban, this is how the Kabul city was, at the end of the Taliban rule. Then there was a hatred against Americans. The cars you are seeing, they are American cars. You can see the pictures. People attacking the what do you call it? Members of the international press. So the hatred towards the foreigners by the Afghans was quite high. And it was in this time that the Bin Laden was accused of conducting the 9/11 event. Taliban were asked to surrender Bin Laden to Americans, but they refused based on the Islamic law. American invaded Afghanistan. the government of Taliban collapsed, and these are the Taliban soldiers which were kept by the local militias, the warlords, who were allying with the Americans. The Americans start war, counting the heads of those they have committed, write it on the stones of the mountains. And as a result, Taliban first they retreated, then they returned to Afghanistan, reorganized themselves, conducted suicide bombing, guerrilla war, and they also established a shadow government. And because of this shadow government, the support from the public, they become strong and strong by every day until the collapse of the Afghan government after the withdrawal of Americans from Afghanistan. Perhaps these facts were not known or ignored by the Americans, and that's why within 11 days they captured Kabul. After the capture of Kabul, if you listen to their speeches, you will think that they are promising, they are educated, they are pragmatic, forgiving, preferring peace, reconciliation, they are open-minded within the limits of Sharia, and they are rigidly Hanafi. Yet they are tolerant of Shia and non-Muslims. So it's, the public, they have mixed support depending who the members of the public are. Normally those who are deprived from power and money or income, they do not like Taliban. Those who are old or we have some Islamic loyalty, they do support them on the TVs. And when you ask people in the public, there is also a media war against the Taliban by journalists, by feminists, and those people who are supported by Western governments. So what we know from the Taliban is that they have declared amnesty to all. A soldier or no soldier, it doesn't matter. Ruler or no ruler. Ex-civil servants are called for work. Army is going to be organized. Police and army personnel are already coming back. But the interim government, which they announced, is not inclusive, even though they say this is inclusive, but perhaps based on the location, based on the regions, Pashtun regions, only one Tajik and one Uzbek are included in the high ranking, in the leading levels. But everyone approves their security, privacy respected, even though a little bit controversial. Laws are not declared whether the existing laws of the previous government are valid or not valid. However, it seems they are not following it. Well, regarding human rights and women rights, the message, again, it's mixed, depends from whom you hear. But what is spoken about by the Taliban is that women cannot be head of the state and they cannot be judged in hudud and qisas cases. Women ministries closed down. Demonstrations were banned after the show, the women and the men, women show some aggressiveness against the Taliban. Journalists in demonstrations are arrested and beaten. They are accused of leading the demonstration. We have segregated education in Afghanistan. Schools have begun, not all, some. The university is going to be starting this week, public universities. The salary of last month is already approved by the Ministry of Finance, so they may be getting their salary now. Women in the healthcare, education, and airports are returned to work. Others are not yet, perhaps because they are believing in segregation between women and men in the workplace. Perhaps they are still busy how to do that. The good thing is that the debates on the TVs are very open. So this is the picture of women, even though the Taliban have not declared what is the code of dress, but this is what emerged, which is a little bit strange, a little bit, not a little bit, very much strange, even to Pashtuns. So I'm not sure whether this one is a voluntary dress or it is imposed dress. So, so these are the women who are supporting the Taliban, and they want to pursue their education despite hijab and niqab. In the private universities, they have the same rule of segregation, but this is how they look. Okay, on the government, it is a de facto government. You can see here, I took the resolution from the European Parliament recently passed by them. The Taliban are the de facto government, but they are not recognized. However, there would be cooperation with them in receiving the aid to the poor and the logistics and so on. Now, we have sanction, and we have also a precondition for recognition. And yet we have a humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan. We have environmental disaster caused by drought. We have IDPs of war and refugees and refugee returnees. And we have COVID-19 cases, dependence of the government and United Nations funding in health and education. We have that one. The government seems to be doing nothing except receiving those funds. Now, after the Taliban take over, international sanctions imposed, and there are quite a lot of problems. If you can see, the poverty rate in Afghanistan is very high, from below, from 34 to 90, almost 90. The other statistic, 14 million people are going hungry. 2 million children are malnourished. And 7 million children under the age of 5 in Afghanistan, in estimated 3.1 million were acutely malnourished. 1 in 2 children under 5 are in need of acute malnutrition treatment services to save their lives. So the situation is a very dire based on the reports from United Nations and Al Jazeera. Perhaps also they have taken it from them. Afghanistan also have the internally displaced people, 500,000, 500,000 of them. Some of them are in very serious condition, others are not. If you can see the coloring, that is based on the seriousness. The darker maroon color is the serious one, and the others are crisis, but not so serious. We also, these are the returnees from Pakistan and Iran. So this also need assistance. These are the acute statistics of acute people who needs the health. And if you see, the IDPs from the Panjshir are not surveyed yet. The number is between 150,000 to 200,000, and it seems the valley is empty. So Afghanistan is facing major economic collapse. UN has reported limited access to cash and possible food shortage. 7 million students, 38% of them girls, will desperately need continued foreign funding.
The time is well past. If you could kindly conclude, would be appreciated, Prof. Thank you so much.
Okay, I think one or two slides. Okay. So the country has no access to foreign currency. the saving of the governments are taken in frozen, banks are closed, or when open, they have problem. So this is the thing also. There is no cash in the banks, trade is affected, no civil servants are working in the majority of them, and the jobs are not there. So even though the United Nations has came up with the 1.2 billion pledge of aid, but the problem is they will be just not solving the problem. They will be just dealing with the problem, but not solving it. Afghanistan seems to be intended to be an aid-dependent country. So all these things are the result of a weak international law, if I can say. And because of that weak international law and the lack of the rules of recognition and so on, the last 20 years of war are meaningless, full of atrocities. Laws were not placed above human, but subservient to the ideological whims of few people. International municipal laws have supported hatred and intolerance and have failed to achieve peace. They may fail again. The future is not very clear. The armed conflict has ended, but the war of ideologies may continue. Internal control and defense of sovereignty of Afghanistan is defended by the Taliban for the last 20 years and would continue. It is damage is long condition for recognitions are imposed. But however, if the countries around the world take objective approach, perhaps the Taliban can be negotiated, things can be negotiated with them. They may need a dialogue. They could be debated with. The only thing is that the Taliban, you have to tell them what they are doing is un-Islamic. As long as it falls within the Islamic framework, they may not cave in. So hopefully a dialogue prevails and power politics ends. And that's all. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you so much, Prof, for your eyes-opening talk on the current situation in Afghanistan. Ladies and gentlemen, it is crucial for a government to act in accordance with some well-established international legal principles for them to be recognized as the legitimate government of the country by other states. In view of that, please kindly allow me to invite our second panelist, Professor Dr. Muhammad Nakib Isanjan, to deliver his panel talk on the Taliban and the questions of international legitimacy.
Thank you, Dr. Hassan. I hope you can hear me, right? Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Honorable Prof. Dean, fellow panelists, distinguished participants, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And a very good morning to you all. Let me say a few words about Afghanistan before I talk about the Taliban and their national and international legitimacy. Afghanistan is a multi-ethnic, multilingual society situated at the heart of South Central Asia. Pakistan, Iran, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and China are the neighbors of Afghanistan. Afghanistan's geopolitical and geoeconomic position, as well as its rich natural resources, has attracted the attention of its neighbors and some other regional and international powers. Sadly, some of these powers have used Afghanistan as a ground to wage proxy wars against each other that have brought nothing but sorrow, insecurity, and displacement to the citizens of Afghanistan. The successful return of the Taliban is the result of such wars. The Taliban's military success is one thing, but gaining national and international legitimacy and ruling the country is quite another. Others have tried to conquer this country, but since they were on the wrong side of certain values cherished by Islam, humanity, and international law, they have failed to rule Afghanistan. Alexander the Great attempted to conquer Afghanistan but failed. Great Britain attempted twice to conquer Afghanistan, yet again failed. The former Soviet Union, USSR, with all its military might, invaded Afghanistan, but not only forced to leave this country, but was disintegrated. 15 countries emerged out of it. And today, we don't even have a country by the name of USSR. Following September 11 incident, US declared the so-called war on terrorism, and along its allies, including NATO, invaded Afghanistan. This invasion brought the invaders few or no tangible result. They did kill the leader of Al-Qaeda, not in Afghanistan, but in Pakistan. US spent about $2 or more trillion in its 20-year war in Afghanistan, and yet it disgracefully retreated, as we witnessed on TV channels and social media. That is why some say Afghanistan is the graveyard of empires. This is true, but the successive government of this country, due to lack of national or international legitimacy, widespread corruption, incoherence, and incompetence, turned Afghanistan into a place of suffering for its citizens and a ground for proxy wars. We have experienced different types of governments in Afghanistan, monarchy, but often royal families turned against each other, communist government, but it was too extremist that it wanted to implement communism within few months, which the former Soviet Union failed to do in over 70 years. Mujahideen government, but again, this too failed due to political disunity among leaders, which gave a chance to the Taliban to form a government in 1996 to 2001, a government that was known for its international isolation because Pakistan was the only country recognized it. That government was overthrown in 2001 and replaced by the US NATO-backed Islamic Republic, which currently, which corruptly mismanaged the country and was overthrown just a few weeks ago by the Taliban. Now, most of these governments lacked legitimacy, some of which were imposed on the Afghan nation without regarding to the will of the people. And because of this, they did not last long. Legitimacy means the right to rule a country. This right is granted by the free will of those who are ruled, that is the people. And it is normally granted through the process of a free and fair election, a process which is recognized under the current constitution of Afghanistan. It is unclear whether the Taliban will respect the Afghan constitution or hold elections to form their next government. What is clear is that they promised to form an inclusive government, but contrary to their promise, they formed a caretaker government that is not really inclusive. It seems at the time of forming their government, the Taliban forgot about the people of Afghanistan. Now, however, they justify their action by saying that it is only a temporary government and will soon be replaced by a permanent and inclusive government. I hope they keep their promise, but experience shows something else. The Taliban made a similar promise in 1996 when they got power for the first time. But their interim government ruled the country for more than 5 years without forming an inclusive government that represents every section of the society. Legitimacy has to be earned. This is true for both national and international legitimacy. The Taliban must win the trust of the people, form an acceptable government, respect the human dignity of every individual, irrespective of gender, protect the fundamental rights of the citizens as enshrined in the Constitution of Afghanistan, and also respect the international treaties to which Afghanistan is a party. Also, Taliban must have a clear foreign policy to gain international legitimacy. I see no reason why the Taliban should not follow Afghanistan's constitution that considers Islam as the official religion of the country and the Sharia as the supreme law of the land. In my opinion, holding general election for the formation of government is not inconsistent with the Sharia, as it can be justified on the basis of the institution of Shura or consultation in Islam. We have Quranic verses which says, وَأَمْرُهُمْ شُورَى بَيْنَهُمْ وَشَاوِرُهُمْ فِي الْأَمْرِ فَإِذَا عَزَمَتْ فَتَوَكَّلْ عَلَى اللَّهِ. We have verses of the Holy Quran relating to that. Nevertheless, national legitimacy of government is an internal matter. International law is neutral in this regard. However, national legitimacy does have implication at the international level. The most relevant concern of international law is recognition of government by other states. I'm not talking about recognition of a state. Afghanistan is a state. It is recognized already. There is no need to recognize Afghanistan anymore. We are talking about the recognition of the Taliban government. We have, there are different theories about recognition of government. The first one is Toba doctrine. According to this doctrine, recognition of government should only be granted if its administration came to power by legitimate democratic means. What it means is that a government that came to power unconstitutionally should not be recognized. Since the Taliban came to power through bullet rather than through ballot, a state following this doctrine may refuse to recognize it. The second theory is the Betancourt doctrine. Based on this doctrine, no recognition accorded to a regime that came to power by military force. The Taliban initially agreed not to enter Kabul militarily and gain power by force, but they acted against this understanding. And their excuse was that a power vacuum had been created since the president fled the country. So they had no choice but to enter Kabul to fill in the gap. In any case, since the Taliban came to power by force, according to this doctrine, they are not eligible for recognition, but sovereign states may decide otherwise. The third doctrine is the Estrada doctrine. This doctrine provides that recognition of government should be based on its de facto existence rather than on its legitimacy. This doctrine is based on the principle of non-intervention and self-determination of all nations. It does not allow states to assess the legitimacy of governments of each others for the purpose of recognition. Yes, the Taliban are now a de facto government in Afghanistan, which is different from a de jure government. In the past, many states have explicitly or implicitly recognized new governments, regardless of how they came to power. But recognition of such government could mean endorsing an unconstitutional regime or endorsing violent means of seizing power, which would be embarrassing for the recognizing state. Some states have started interacting with the Taliban government for a variety of reasons. For example, the repatriation of their nationals from Kabul or delivering humanitarian aid to Afghanistan. However, such interaction do not imply recognition of the Taliban government. Recognition can be implied from conduct such as establishing diplomatic relations or negotiating treaties, but so far no state have interacted with the Taliban in such a way. Recognition would give the Taliban government access to everything from billions in fruit assets to a seat at the United Nations and to diplomatic immunity for their representative when they travel abroad. For example, the Taliban's Amir al-Mu'minin, Mullah Hibatullah Akhund, if travels overseas, although nobody has seen him yet, he would enjoy immunity from local jurisdiction there. However, so far no state has expressly or impliedly recognized the Taliban government. Even their friends, Pakistan, Qatar, China, and Russia, waiting for the Taliban to form an acceptable, inclusive Islamic government before they recognize it. Should the Taliban form a legitimate government that respect the rule of law and protect the fundamental rights of the citizens, it should be recognized as the legitimate government. For otherwise, getting international legitimacy would be a difficult task. Now, in short, the Taliban are suffering from lack of international legitimacy. At this time, they cannot represent Afghanistan at the United Nations and at the other international institutions. They cannot access to Afghanistan's assets abroad. They cannot obtain access to IMF resources. Their top officials visiting abroad may not be granted immunity. They cannot represent Afghanistan in a lawsuit. So the Taliban have to work hard to earn international legitimacy. They should also earn the trust of the people to gain national legitimacy. Otherwise, they may face serious security and economic problems, either because of fear or because of lack of opportunity. Young Afghan professionals who created jobs for thousands of Afghans in the private sector have left the country or thinking to leave. This shows something is wrong somewhere in the country, which makes people to flee. If the Taliban really want to rule Afghanistan and get international legitimacy, they should allow this country to live in peace with itself and with the international community. Thank you for listening. I'm done.
Thank you so much, Prof, for sharing international legal perspective on the legitimacy of the Taliban in governing Afghanistan. Ladies and gentlemen, another question that always lingered in our head is that the sudden withdrawal of the US forces whether this will really end the military intervention in Afghanistan or it will lead to another. In order to answer this, please kindly allow me to invite our third panelist, Professor Dr. Abdul Ghaffur Hamid, to deliver his panel talk on ending the unlawful foreign military intervention in Afghanistan. What's next? Thank you.
How do I?
Okay, can you see the slide now?
Yes, Prof.
Okay,
Yes,
thank
Prof.
you very much.
Thank you very
much. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Our respected Dean, Prof. Farid, and then our fellow panelists, and then respected participants. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. A very good morning. So today I'm discussing very briefly on the topic of ending the unlawful foreign military intervention in Afghanistan. What's next? So this is you know very well about the Afghanistan war, 2001 to 2021, 20 years long war. So now a very brief revisit of the legality of the US military invasion of Afghanistan. And as you all know, there are commentators who argued that the US military invasion in 2001 was lawful. However, most international lawyers are of the view that it was a blatant violation of contemporary international law. So we all know that painstaking analysis and discussions took place in the aftermath of 9/11 regarding the legality of foreign military intervention of Afghanistan. I will now summarize the relevant international law on this matter. The relevant international law is the law of the United Nations Charter. Article 2, Clause 4 of the UN Charter prohibits the use of force. Prohibition of the use of force is the general law, the general rule. And this is also a jus cogens principle. Jus cogens means a peremptory norm from which no derogation is permitted. And according to the restrictive interpretation of this Article 2, Clause 4, there are only two exceptions to this general principle of prohibition of the use of force. The first exception is the right of self-defense under Article 51 of the Charter, and the second exception is the United Nations Security Council enforcement measures under Chapter 7 of the UN Charter. So these two are the two legitimate uses of force. If we apply this law to the Afghanistan situation, first, let us look at whether there was a lawful exercise of right of self-defense. The answer is no. Why? Because the elements of the right of self-defense are not satisfied. First, there was no arm attack by the Afghan government or by the Taliban against the US. The 9/11 attack was done by the terrorists, and they were not state organs of the Taliban, or they were not the agents of the Taliban. Secondly, the second element, necessity. So the military intervention was done after about 1 month of the 9/11 attack and not fulfill the requirement of necessity as laid down in the Caroline case: instant, overwhelming, and no moment for deliberation. There is no instancy and there is no immediacy. And the third element, proportionality. So there was no proportionality as the US forces stationed in Afghanistan not only invaded, but still occupied Afghanistan for many years Okay, many years. And also there was a regime change. So they overthrow the Taliban regime and they establish a new regime, which is pro-US or pro-Western regime. This is the first exception of right of self-defense. There was not a lawful exercise of self-defense. The second exception was there, and the Security Council resolution, which provided that this is an enforcement measure under Chapter 7 of the UN Charter. The answer is also in the negative. It was only a unilateral use of force. The US and its allies used the military intervention in Afghanistan, and there was no resolution of the Security Council which said that this is an enforcement action under the Chapter 7 of the United Nations Charter. So therefore, if we compare the Afghanistan war with the Vietnamese war, Afghanistan war is a much bitter lesson, because the first lesson for the US was the Vietnamese war. You know very well the notoriety of the Vietnam War and how American people suffer because of the Vietnam War, how the Vietnamese people suffer. Now the Afghanistan war is a much bitter lesson. It was a total failure. It was the longest war, and billions of dollars, trillions of dollars were spent, and thousands of military and also civilian casualties. For what? And for whom? Who are the winners? This is a big question mark. Who are the winners? And this is merely a geopolitical gambit of politicians, geopolitical gambit, and a wrong decision by the leaders, the politicians, by gambling the lives of innocent people, by gambling the future of a nation, the future of Afghanistan. And the losers, very clear, the people of Afghanistan are the losers. And also the American taxpayers. So the people of Afghanistan are the direct victims of this unlawful military invasion. And American taxpayers are the indirect victims of that. They have to pay a lot of money, trillions of US dollars. And also American soldiers, the lives of American soldiers. These are the losers. Then what next? What next? It means that the foreign military intervention, we know that it's a very clear violation of international law. It was a crime committed against the Afghanistan people. Now foreign military forces left Afghanistan. Can they simply leave like that? Can they leave without any accountability, without taking the responsibility for whatever wrongful act they inflicted? What do you think? Definitely they have to take the responsibility. So the international military forces, they left behind a raging conflict in Afghanistan. They left behind a more divided Afghanistan. And they left behind an uncertain future, and a legacy of impunity. It's not fair to just leave without taking the responsibility. To remedy the situation which was their own making. As so-called democracies, they must have accountability. When we talk about to take the responsibility, I'm talking about two forms of responsibility under international law. The first form of responsibility is, we call it state responsibility. State responsibility. It was an unlawful use of force. So it was a breach of international law. And therefore, it incurs state responsibility. This is the first type of responsibility. And the second type of responsibility is the commanders, the leaders who commanded, and the soldiers. They wage an aggressive war. Aggression is a crime of aggression. And they might have committed war crimes and a crime against humanity. All these are international, heinous international crimes. And as far as state responsibility issue is concerned, it would be rather difficult to enforce against a superpower like US and its allies. But however, So these countries should at least take the moral responsibility by paying ex gratia compensation for the economic reconstruction of Afghanistan, like what the Japanese government did after the World War II. They paid a lot of money to these East Asian and Southeast Asian countries as war compensation. So will the Americans and allied powers, will they pay at least ex gratia compensation like that? This is our question. The second type of responsibility is, we call it individual criminal responsibility. Individual criminal responsibility, bringing the perpetrators of international crimes to justice. So now let us move on to this topic of International Criminal Court and the situation in Afghanistan. So as you all know, Afghanistan is a party to the Rome Statute. They acceded to the Rome Statute on the 10th February 2003. That's why the ICC, International Criminal Court, has jurisdiction over crimes in the Rome Statute committed on the territory of Afghanistan or by its nationals from 1st May 2003 onwards. And between 7 December 2017 to 9 February 2018, a total number of 699 victims representation, mean cases, were brought to the ICC for crimes and war crimes and crime against humanity. And then on 5th March 2020, the trial chamber decided unanimously to authorize the prosecutor of the ICC to commence an investigation on alleged crimes under the Rome Statute in the situation in Afghanistan. And these crimes included alleged war crimes and a crime against humanity committed by the US military, CIA personnel, Afghanistan security forces, and also the Taliban. But as you all know, the road to ICC is an uphill battle. It is an uphill battle. Because on 26 March 2020, the government of Afghanistan requested the prosecutor to defer the investigation so that it could provide evidence that it would hold those responsible to account. So this request, as you all know, is relying on the principle of complementarity. The ICC is only the complementary only. The national, prosecution, investigating prosecution is the first priority, and ICC is the only secondary or complementary only. If states themselves, for example, Afghanistan itself is willing or able to pursue, to prosecute, or to investigate, then ICC will not interfere. But there was every reason to doubt that the Afghan government had initiated effective investigations and prosecutions. And that's why, because of that, very recently, on 3rd September 2021, the pre-trial chamber 2 dismissed the Afghanistan government's request for deferral. So that it means that the prosecutor can proceed with the investigation. The investigation in the situation of Afghanistan has to proceed, and it's officially authorized by the International Criminal Court. But of course, the success of the investigation depends on the cooperation of state parties, and in particular, the Taliban, because Taliban is the current de facto authority of Afghanistan. So as you all know, the situation regarding America, United States of America, is that they are against ICC. So how will we take action against the US military personnel? And US previously threatened the court and also the parties to the ICC that they will take retaliatory measures over the potential Afghanistan investigation and impose even a visa ban on the former ICC prosecutor Fatou Bensouda. This is a very, very glaring impunity that they want to practice impunity. So that's why ICC investigation faces a lot of challenges. Okay? The security environment is not good, and political landscape is not still fluid, and then very difficult to get together evidence. And as you all know, there is no police force in ICC, so ICC must rely on member states, especially Afghanistan in this case, to cooperate with the court for investigations, for arrest, and for prosecutions. So the question is, will the Taliban cooperate with the ICC? Now, the third point I want to highlight here is how will we engage with the Taliban 2.0? This Afghan disaster has become the butt of the joke the world over. Once the humiliated evacuation from the Kabul airport, right? So there was an online gag. It says that if you feel useless, just remember USA. USA took 4 presidents, thousands and thousands of lives, trillions of dollars, and it took 20 years to replace the Taliban with the Taliban. 2001, the Taliban, now 2021, the Taliban, after 20 years. So our question is, how will we engage with the Taliban 2.0? So they have statements signaling that surely they will be pragmatists now. They are willing to compromise, and they also realize that Afghanistan has transformed since 2001. After 20 years, Afghanistan has transformed. So that's why what the Taliban wants, 3 things they want. Number 1, they do not want to be isolated once again. In 2001, only 3 countries legally recognized Taliban government. Now they do not want that again. They do not want to be isolated once again in 2021. And secondly, they want international recognition and aids. And thirdly, they want foreign investment and development. Then what the Taliban promises and does, so has granted amnesty to all the civil servants. They will not arrest. Okay, come, still go on with the job. We will not arrest you. Again, speaking of forming an inclusive government, this is one of their promises. And then they say that allowing girls to go to school and then women to stay in works so long as they are complying with Sharia as interpreted by them. And then they have already dialogue with Beijing, and they want to continue dialogue with US. So you can see this photo very recently taken, right? Foreign Minister and State Councilor Wang Yi, a very famous Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi, meets with the head of the Afghan Taliban Commission, Mullah Abdul Ghani Barada. And you look at the date, very recent, 28 July 2021. This is 2 weeks before the Taliban took Kabul. And this is very significant. The Chinese are very fast. The Chinese are very fast. Although in the past, the Chinese government had criticized the Taliban a lot. When the Taliban were gaining grounds, they were very fast to engage with the Taliban. Okay, and then they are very smart and clever. They take the full opportunity of the departure of the Western forces and promptly fill the void, fill the power vacuum. And because Afghanistan is a strategic country for Chinese BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative, but the Taliban has to be careful not to be caught in the death trap. It is good to engage with the West as well, and they should practice a balanced foreign policy. Otherwise, China will take everything from Afghanistan. You know very well, they are business people, right? Business people. They know only about money. So, whether the Taliban's promises signal a real change of heart, or it is merely a tactic to break out of isolation, it remains to be seen. Most remain skeptical. And there are so much allegations and condemning against the Taliban 1.0, the old Taliban, as irreconcilable extremist. How will the Taliban 2.0 be? But anyway, the bottom line is that although their interpretation Sharia is so strict, they are still brothers in Islam. So without their help, the international community cannot render the necessary humanitarian assistance to the now suffering Afghanistan people, because they are now the de facto government of Afghanistan. Afghanistan is under the effective control of the Taliban. So we must face the reality. So that's instead of merely putting the blame on or neglecting the Taliban, the international community needs to engage with them for the sake of the people of Afghanistan. So two main points: to pressure the Taliban to keep their promises and to push them to negotiate with all the factions in Afghanistan for national reconciliation and for an inclusive government. So that's why let us pray for peace and national reconciliation and speedy economic recovery of the people of Afghanistan. So with that, I end my presentation. Thank you very much. Wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Wassalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you so much, Prof, for sharing your perspective on what might happen after the foreign military intervention in Afghan. Ladies and gentlemen, people across the world are also very much worrying and concerned about the situations of women in Afghan as to whether they will be treated properly by the Taliban. I mean, this has been one of the focus what the world population, as far as the world population is concerned. So Taliban, on the other hand, have always claimed that they are treating towards women in accordance with Islamic teaching and Sharia, of course, as they interpret how the Sharia is supposed to be. Then in that aspect, let us invite our fourth panelist, Professor Dr. Najeeba Mohammad Zin, in order to deliver her panel talk on Sharia and the women's rights, to learn more about what are the women's rights and the Sharia in a brief moment. Please, Prof.
Thank you very much, Hassan, for inviting me for the introduction just now. With regard to the women's rights issue, as I look into women's rights and Sharia here, but I'm not going to comment a lot on the situation in Afghanistan. I have a very limited knowledge with that, but I have the opportunity to visit Kabul back in 2015, something like that, engage with I engaged with women over there, because at that time they were about to come out with a family law to regulate the family law as a specific law to be applied to the family in Afghanistan, despite the fact that there was already, there are provisions already in the Afghan civil code. But it was really a quite healthy discussion, very good discussion, that involved active participations of many women from all levels. So we have women who were already as a prosecution from the prosecution department. They were engaged in many government agencies as well as private agencies. So these are the scenarios I think continue perhaps until we see now Taliban took over the administration of government, and I think that maybe we could address the issue that what could happen perhaps if, let's say, the pictures that was given by Dr. Tahir just now with regard to the rigidity in the interpretation of Islamic law still in place. So some kind of bringing the parties, I would say backward, but into a situation that definitely will cause a lot of depression to women in particular. So as we know that, I think what actually being portrayed, for example, not just only in Afghanistan, when we talk about women particularly, even in Africa, in many countries, it always associated with cultural issues that we used to see even until now. For example, like unwanted baby girls, for example, it still happen, like in Chinese community. When they one policy last time. Now they're going to two children policies, 3 children policies, and so on. And we could see that domestic violence happens. Women actually have no rights, and we could see abuses reported quite. Largely reported not only in Afghanistan, but we could see in many other parts of the world when the issue relating to men and women are in place. And we have problem with forced marriage still, especially in I have students actually come from, I have students supervising students from Afghanistan, Pakistan, perhaps from African countries. We have minor marriage. Recently, even in Malaysia, we will talk about minor marriage. But I'm not actually generalizing, but this minor marriage is still happening even in Afghanistan and Pakistan as well, and in other places. And when I asked the people who are actually in the seminar last time, they say that it still happens in remote areas of Afghanistan. And then we have issues relating to unjustified divorce and polygamous marriage is still problematic. So I just go very briefly, and we still have like denial of property rights, self-determination in terms of deciding her private rights to property and so on. And I've been told by students from Afghanistan who actually a lawyer by background, and she says of how in the areas where women after the death of the husband had forced to marry the family members in order to make sure that the property of the family is secure. And generally we could see that issues related to women's subjugation, generalization, and treated as a second-class citizen is still there. Okay. And then we could see that, for example, when Islam comes, but once Islam actually try to uplift and upgrade the women's status, and we could see the number in Islamic tradition, Islamic principles, for example, killing of daughters is strongly prohibited. It is there in the Quran. And women has been declared as to have her own right to paternity and citizenship, even though we still have issues relating to whether women can offer citizenship to the children, and this is still debating. Whatever it is, this issue has been tackled quite well in international cities as well as. And in many countries, they have already changed and upgrade this issue. But another issue that perhaps I would like to address a bit more is related to the forced marriage. And so in Islam, it is recognized for women to enter into marriage, to choose her spouse. To choose her spouse, and this is something for which if anything happens, it always associated with culture. For example, like I was told by the students from Afghanistan last time that she herself, being a lawyer, she has no right to choose her spouse, even what more to know the person before she gets married. I think this is nothing to do with Islam, but it is to do with the culture. I believe that in her situation, even though she's highly educated, but the family choose to adhere to a certain cultural practice to some extent, that she said to me that if I told my parents that I already in contact with someone that I'm supposed to marry, definitely I'll be, some action will be taken against her. That's what she told me. But as I mentioned just now, it could happen to a certain community, might not happen to other community. I really don't know. But I think with that situation in place, I believe that if let's say the Taliban is still adhering to that kind of interpretations, then it could be somehow rampant in that particular community. And then Islam thought about the right age for marriage. So we are talking about the issue of minor marriage is still rampant, not only in Afghanistan but also in other parts of the world. Even in Saudi, we still see reports, and it is much rampant, of course, in the African community. Yeah, I've attended a number of seminars where this issue has been raised from time to time. Yeah, so the issue of the women issues, this is one of the issues that has been discussed or debated even until now, and this is quite a major issue, I think, in the context of Taliban, for example, in Afghanistan. Yeah,
Excuse me, Prof. The voice is a little bit breaking up. So could Prof a bit increase the voice, Prof? Please kindly.
So, and then another thing is regard to the right to education. Why in this particular context, I think we have seen reports time where women have not been allowed to go to the formal education, but they are actually, of course, allowed to receive religious education those in the past. But what Prof Mahir has given us in terms of the latest development, I think that's quite interesting to see. Even though they have to adhere to a certain regulations that are imposed by the government right now, but I still be able to go to universities and receive a formal education. I think that is quite interesting to see, because last time we used to receive students from Afghanistan when I was and then she explained on how during Taliban they are not allowed even to go to the university and so on. Okay, so I think I skipped this. But I think when we talk about the issue of equality, the issue of quality in Muslim countries, it is very normal to see that the perceptions about patriarchal society, where we could see that the male dominating everything, and women do not have the right to decide for herself. So I think that in this particular context, what is important basically for me, patriarchal concept should be viewed as giving protection and assistance, rather than domination or dictatorship, as we could see being practiced in many Muslim countries, and then putting restriction. So this is what happened, and why this happened. I think I will do that in another slide later on. And then another thing I think is very important, that the role of men and women must be seen in a balance. So I think the concept of wasatiyah, moderation, which is basically very much what we call projected when we talk about Sharia. So I don't know how it is going to be implemented, but to some extent, I think when we talk about laws with regard to even family, with regard to men and women and so on, it has to be in the balance. It cannot be it cannot be that one person got advantage over the other. Okay, so I think the issue of another thing, maybe the issue of financial. This is what I have already mentioned just now, that right women to receive financial support, which in many countries the issue of financial support is problematic. Even in Malaysia, it is still problematic, and that's why we need to have special measures how to make it happen. It is not to say that. And then right to work, for example, where of course women need to participate or need to contribute to the country, especially in a situation where she herself has potential to develop further, to develop not just only herself but contribute to the well-being of the country. I think this is also important. This should be part of the government plan as well, in order to promote women empowerment and women contributions in the society. This is where I think when I was there back in 2015 or 14, I could see that we have quite encouraging participations of women in the society, and they come from various backgrounds, from the government, from the NGO, and from private institutions as well, as they view their opinion on it, which is quite encouraging. And to bring back and to curb this freedom that has been given to women all those years, I think this is quite unfair. Yeah? Okay. And then, I think this another thing that for which I would like to touch a bit, given the background, what do you call it, relying to the background that has been given just now by Dr. Sali, I think the reason why sometimes, especially when we talk about patriarchal society where men decide everything, we always have a sort of like misconceived perceptions with Islam and women. Why it is happened? Why it is happened? Those days, many of the literatures with regard to women were written by Western writers, and then in their writing, basically the study very much based on the sociological and anthropological, not much of the discussion based on the law, on the Islamic law, and how it is being dealt with, for example, in the court and so on. And most of the time, women being portrayed as disadvantaged, and then lack of data to support the study of women. And I hope that, for example, in the context of the new government in Afghanistan, so they have to do a lot of studies to see on how women and men should engage, and how they can contribute to the society. And then we have a lack of experts or specialized in family issues and programs. And I think this is also pertinent, where if the government wants to sort of address issues relating to family, women, and children, particularly, they need to have experts, people to advise the government. So it is not just merely looking into the text of Hanafis, for example, text of Shafi'i. They need to engage people because whatever it is, women and children issues, for example, or I'm talking from the family perspective, it is a specialized issue. It has to be based on the situation, the real situations that happen in that society itself. Okay, so in that particular context, from the misconception, people see lack of adequate research to provide feedback for the implementation of national policies and data. So I think we need to have representations from all.
Nanti hari saya punya motor boleh.
Representation from all parties, especially women. And now even in Malaysia, we have children who actually give feedback to the government on how they're supposed to be treated, and the government needs to be critical about it. Okay. Yeah. So I think the other problem with the women issues is actually on the interpretation of Islamic law or Sharia. Yeah. Okay. I think this is very much relevant in the context of Afghanistan as well. Because when we talk about women, particularly, the issue of legal interpretation. So in many societies, that's also in Afghanistan, when we talk about Islamic law or Sharia, we always look into the text. Of course, text is very important. I'm talking about text here, we talk about fiqh. So when Dr. Tahir said it is rigid Hanafis and so on, so we cannot just simply look into one particular text. So we need to open up the horizons of references, looking into various areas of law rather than just adhering to one particular text, because otherwise we cannot solve the problem of the society. So we know already that in the context of man and women relationship, the term qawam and so on, wife obedience has been an issue, and that's why we could see that in many Muslim countries as well, who are quite progressive with regard to the development of women and children, they already removed this term from their law, from their family law particularly. And we have a lot of misconceptions about the hadith of Prophet when he married Aisha. The age factor, the age factor has been used a lot by so-called Muslim scholars to justify child marriage, for example. And definitely not only in Ramadan, even in Malaysia, we still have a problem with regard to that. And then the issue of hadith, where women cannot be a leader. And this hadith specifically has been interpreted rather wrongly, because this hadith is very specific to the situation at that time when the Prophet said women cannot be a leader. It's not because of women cannot be a leader, but because at that time the woman who was appointed as a leader is not a qualified or person to be a leader. So this is the generalizing of the hadith and so on of the Islamic tradition and so on has caused a lot of misconceptions when issues relating to women are increased. Then we have legal interpretations where women half of man. What's inheritance? We have an issue there, but the issue of the wisdom on how this concept of inheritance has not been given emphasis. But what is emphasized so much on the mathematical calculation, and giving testimony, restriction to be appointed in judiciary. I think this are all related so much to the literal interpretations of the text itself. So because of the misunderstanding, literal interpretation, and then the lack of understanding on how even to read the text, the big text, for example, has led to, as what I borrow the term from Professor Ahmad, says that the protective mindset among the Muslim scholars. And when we study, when we don't understand the methodology of reading the text, the fixed text, then at the end of the day, we could see that too many restrictions imposed on women. Women cannot do this, women cannot do that. When women do this, they have to do, in certain ways and so on. So the imposition of barriers, for example, I think it is not necessary, for example. It is, then when
the time has been well past.
Okay. Can I just conclude? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So because of that, I think that then it develops, it becomes what we call cultural colonization, and then the projection is very much on women rather than their role. So I think in that particular context, so we need to widen the scope of legal interpretation, and as what Dr. Thai said, being literate. So we need to have our people, the Muslims, literate, not just only literate in terms of upgrading themselves in terms of the education level, but at the same time, when it comes to the issues of women and children particularly, which requires a very specialized domain, then of course it has to be understood in its context. So we need to contextualize the text of fiqh study to be applicable fairly to women and children. And I think engagement between men and women need to be understood in terms of their role, their needs, their functions, rather than being women and children. And I think what is more important actually at this level is that engagement, wider scope of engagement, and do not focus on the details. They need to look at the wider perspective, removing the un-Islamic cultures, as we mentioned by Nakib just now, remove the un-Islamic cultures, which is very much actually inherited from the old cultural practices. So with that, I thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof, for kindly sharing your knowledge on women rights in Islam and also under Sharia. At the same time, you have provided some way forward for the Muslim Ummah, how to go about with women rights. Ladies and gentlemen, last but not least, please kindly allow me to invite our distinguished panelists today, Professor Dr. Muhammad Hashim Kamali, founding CEO of International Institute of Advanced Islamic Studies, IIS Malaysia, to deliver his concluding remarks. Please,
Thank you. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wal aqibatu lil muttaqeen. Wa salatu wa salamu ala Sayyidil Anbiya wal Mursaleen. Amma ba'd. Thank you, Kulliyyah of Laws, my dear colleagues, for giving me this opportunity to be with you again after having left that Kulliyyah long time ago, 20 years ago. It's a long time. But it is like being among friends and colleagues. Many of the faces, of course, are familiar. Some were my students even, but they are professors, full professors. We have heard very informative, substantive presentations on Afghanistan, on Islam. And there is, my presentation will not be on specifics so much, but will try to engage on the realities of Sharia in Afghanistan. And what do we expect of the Taliban? The Taliban started their campaign in 2001 with two demands. One was that the Americans, the foreigners, must leave Afghanistan. And the second was that Sharia must be fully implemented in Afghanistan. Of these two, the first was valid. The second was, of course, maybe partially valid. Afghanistan has always applied the Sharia, unlike like many other countries, unlike Malaysia, for example, where Sharia law is not the general law of the land. In Afghanistan, Sharia is the general law of the land. And there are specific codes and laws like commercial codes, like civil servants codes, and so on. But the general codes of justice are Sharia codes to this day. And Sharia law was also applied from time immemorial until the 1920s. Perhaps it was not codified, but after that, and during the times of since the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, Sharia law was written in usul namas, in qanun. There are about close to 60 laws of different descriptions, substantive, procedural, applied aspects of the Sharia, in court affairs. In 1976 and 77, the civil code, which is about 2,300 articles. This was a major piece of legislation. The Civil Code of Afghanistan in 1976 was the code, in fact, was a general law that covered all aspects of the Sharia. And there was a criminal code, more than 500 articles. Again, both of these are perhaps more than 95% based on Sharia. Although the experts, Afghan experts, would describe the Afghanistan legal system as a mixed, mukhtalat, that both the Sharia and also modern laws, some of them based on European legislation, like the commercial code, for example, in civil servants legislation, they are based either on Egyptian precedent or French or others. So it is a mixed system, but in the major areas of the civil and criminal affairs, it is the Sharia that is the applied law of Afghanistan, but the Sharia has generally been written down. Before that, it was the ulama and judges who would apply the Hanafi fiqh according to the books that were well known, like the Hidayah of Al-Marghinani and one or two other books that were the Mujalla, for example, the Mujalla Al-Ahkam Al-Adliya, that was borrowed from the Ottomans, side by side with some Afghan laws. These were the substantive laws of Sharia that were applied in the courts of Afghanistan. And we had, of course, constitutions. Most of the 20th century and 21st, we had about 7 constitutions, very frequent. Every new regime came with a new constitution. It was like becoming a practice that a new regime must bring a new constitution. This is a bad conception, but that was how it was. Of these many constitutions, the one that took a long time, like about 12 months of deliberations, and then the 2004 constitutions took about 18 months of consultation, committee work, and preparation. So these last 2 constitutions are the kind of they become, they are difficult to replace. They are comprehensive and they are well established. The rule of law in Afghanistan includes both the Sharia and the codified laws outside the Sharia in commercial affairs, economic affairs, industry, etc., etc. The Sharia laws and the codified laws of Afghanistan are mainly based on the Hanafi fiqh. The people of Afghanistan are Hanafi followers, probably 99%, 98% probably. No, there are Shias. There are Shias, about 10 to 12% of Shias, but the laws, legislation basically mainly based on Hanafi fiqh. Only in the last maybe 10, 15 years, the Shias have become more active, and they have brought some of their own laws in certain places, like 1 or 2 provinces of Afghanistan. Shia law is also applied. The court system applies. And it is now recognized if both parties or one of the parties are Shia followers, they may apply Shia law in the courts. This is part of the constitution. I was also a constitution commissioner, and a member also of the Constitution Review Commission of Afghanistan that then became the 2004 constitution. The Hanafi fiqh, when it was not codified, there was this risk that placed in the hands of the mullahs and in the traditional minded judges, they were inclined to be hardliners, punitive, the kind of, make of Sharia, the kind of the applied aspect of Sharia, people, not people friendly, people unfriendly, the people, that kind of thing. Although the Afghan people, they have a perception of Sharia to be a preferable law for the country, to be a balanced system and so on, but given in the hands of these hardline people, they have sort of this hardline aspect. Now, in the last maybe 20, 30 years, we have two types of judges. Educated, modern educated faculty graduates, and those who come from the traditional madrasa backgrounds. Maybe they are now both maybe in equal numbers, but perhaps the traditional judges are still quite, in large numbers. And you have to work on it to make the Hanafi fiqh, apply for what it is and how it is. And the kind of the religious mentality of Afghanistan is that Hanafi fiqh is, must be applied. Their preference, I have heard people, even some of the faculty graduates, the faculty of Shariat, they would insist on Hanafi fiqh, but the laws of Afghanistan are mixed. We have borrowed from Maliki fiqh, we have borrowed from other aspects of the Sharia, and there is this kind of, legislation. When the Sharia is codified, there is this a mix, a blend that the Hanafi fiqh is, moderated to some extent. But now that we have the Taliban, our expectation, their own demands that we want Afghanistan Sharia to be fully applied, we don't know how do they define that demand more specifically, and how do they receive, for example. For the time being, they seem to be not applying the written laws of Afghanistan. There are, as I said, close to 60 or maybe around that laws, mostly based on Sharia, but some of them are other sources. Would they be applying the existing laws of Afghanistan that is it is a blend of text and context. The Sharia itself is open to influences, is open to the general custom, urf of the people. In fact, urf is a recognized source of the Sharia, and adaptation with people's lifestyle, like the Sharia applied in Ottoman Empire in 16th century is not the same as it is today. For example, the Mujalla that was in 18th century, even then the Ottoman society grew out of the Mujalla as well. They legislated and modified and modernized the Sharia. Now, what we do not know what are the Taliban version of full implementation of the Sharia. And for sure, they will apply Hanafi fiqh, but I would not be surprised if they brought the Hanafi textbooks back to regulate the code practices. That would be a backward step, because in the last 80 years, legislation has brought aspects of Afghan experience, its development and its constitutional kind of regulations into the body of the Sharia. And these laws that are documented Sharia, these are not sort of pure Hanafi fiqh. So 3 areas now are in focus. People's expectation of the Taliban are with respect to the treatment of women's rights. And like my colleagues earlier explained in more detail, human rights and constraints on liberties, on civil liberties that the Taliban might try to compromise Afghanistan's tradition of rule of law in Sharia in blended form, and they may, by bringing the Hanafi text back to the code practices, they would be leaving out a great deal of good experience. And that will be a backward step. I think it would not be welcome by the modern educated strata of the Afghan society. And I think that maybe among the Taliban, was said that they are not a kind of, there are mixed influences among them. They may not also favor a total backward step and accept the kind of mixed experiences, but there is this worry that what would they actually make of the implementation of Sharia. If we go back to the Hanafi text, I think it would be a difficult experience for the justice system of Afghanistan. There is a lot of regulation, moderation, changes that we will be leaving them out. Sharia is also always applied in a mixed format, like side by side with the Sharia. The Sharia itself has the doctrine of siyasa Sharia allows the rulers to regulate aspects of law and government, and to that extent, in all countries, even in Saudi Arabia, they have this nizam in irada. You have rule by decree and written laws within the areas of the Sharia and outside, that this is accepted by the Sharia itself. Perhaps, there has been always, centuries ago, during the time of Amir Abdul Rahman and his predecessors, and afterwards, they issued decrees, and they have issued a number of the judicial circulars. The Supreme Court in Afghanistan, the last 20, 30 years, have issued a lot of these Muttahidul Ma'al, or judicial circulars that regulate aspects of the Hanafi fiqh side by side with these laws. So these are the kind of, in Afghanistan, like in many other Muslim countries, in addition to Sharia, there has been this decree laws and other documents that regulate the Sharia. And the other is women's rights. How do they treat women? They have already said that girls are allowed to go to schools, but there are this segregation in classes and so on. Gradually, there are things that are coming out that are just the kind of existing experiences. Still, we do not know at this stage. It's difficult to predict what the Taliban agenda is. There is this international influence like UAE, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and Qatar. They are all familiar with the mixed legal system. And I think the kind of, there is certain expectations from Egypt and other countries that the Taliban should not make of the Sharia the hardline Sharia that was applied a century ago, but to be open to new influences. Our own expectation is also in line with that, and that women should, they have gained under the Constitution, the equality clauses of the Constitution grant women equal rights. And they do not mention these sectors like property, like work, like education. No, all aspects, all rights women have, they stand on the same footing as everyone else in Afghanistan. They should not be discriminated. But my fear is that this may come under scrutiny, whether the international opinion that is also addressing the Taliban in the direction of moderation, whether that will be, their pressure will be strong enough to keep the Taliban, on the moderate line. It would be good for the international community to engage with the Taliban. If you are alienating, if you engage with them, you inform them that these are our expectations, they will try to stand in line. Otherwise, if you alienate them, they are free to their own devices, and that is not what we would want to do. So it's best to engage with the Taliban, like my other colleagues already said. I think Afghanistan society will generally also be expecting moderation. The enlightened element in our society now is strong enough to generate an element of pressure that Taliban should not throw the good experience that we have gained, not just in the last 20 years, but in the last 80 years, that Afghanistan, the gains that constitution and laws and rule of law and other areas, women's rights and education and so on. They must value these and preserve the best. If they don't, they will alienate themselves and would jeopardize their own future in Afghanistan. I think that I will stop at this, and I thank you for your attention. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you so much, Prof, for your insightful concluding remarks. Now, please kindly allow me to pose the question to the respective panelists. I've gathered so many questions, so I would request to the panelists, please kindly to answer it as short as possible due to the time constraint. At the same time, my apologies for all the panelists. I really have to be strict with the time being on Friday. People will wish to catch the Friday prayers. So the first question will go to our first panelist, Prof. Muhammad Tahi. It's someone posed asking that you have mentioned in your presentation of Taliban 1.0, which is a bit lack of formal education or not fully educated in a way. So do you think Taliban 2.0 is different from them and they are more equipped with knowledge in order or educated in order to react accordingly with international community?
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. The Taliban 1.0. I have been to Afghanistan during the Mujahideen time, during the Taliban time. I had the opportunity to talk to them. So based on my experience with them, most of them were not the Maulavis. The Maulavis, what is the term? That they have finished all the levels of traditional education. So most of them were halfway through. Even I think Mullah Muhammad Imar was not even fully Mullah. So and because of that kind of atmosphere, and then the lack of exposure to the international affairs, and being a little bit egoistic, they have won the war. So all those elements combined, they were very, insisting on their own ideas. The really what they learn in Hidayah, like Prof mentioned, they would be expecting that. I was not even thinking that they could go to the Ibn Abidin or Ibn Kamal, or so the main textbook look like they are just relying on the Al-Hidayah. When we come to the current Taliban, I have been listening to some of the scholars on TV, Afghan TVs. And they are talking about the Ulawiyat. So the Ulawiyat is this new theory introduced by Al-Qardawi, and so they do. It seems like for even hijab, someone has asked them what kind of hijab. Then they say in hijab there is no fixed way how to you do cover. So and if you look at the Kabul now, in the government offices, on TVs, women are, some of them are dressing the way they were dressing before the Taliban. Half of their hair could be seen, their neck can be seen, and some of them they will do a little bit proper, like in Malaysia. But then you also have those, suddenly the emergence of those women who are fully covered. You cannot see even their eyes. Someone has published an article promoting the idea of what do you call it, this Ahl Hadith. So this is the new Taliban, and when you listen to them, the emphasis is more on the education, not education of the religion, but also the education of, modern sciences. Their main idea is we cannot be independent unless we are economically self-reliant. So if you take that idea from them that they want economic independence, then they have to be moderate. They have to be open-minded. And if you look at this Olaviathfunia idea, it seems they have advanced some, they have advanced studies. But on the other hand, you also heard from one of them that the just, the way they define Islamic government, they just see the Amana idea, inclusive government, because inclusive government needs to be not only the mullah, but also it has to be professionals and from different sectors of the society. So they emphasize on the Amana. They say Amana can be found under the mullahs, what they have now. And the other one is they say Kuwa. Kuwa means power. So I was a bit shocked to hear how narrow definition of the government they are making. So if they are emphasizing only on the Amana and Kuwa, but not on the Kifaya, Kifaya means qualification, then perhaps they are very narrow-minded. So at the moment, we don't have exact idea because these are perhaps could be the personal opinion of the scholars which are on TV. But this compared to the previous time, this seems to be open-minded. They are interviewing with the ladies on the TV. As I mentioned, half of her head will be uncovered and her neck will be exposed, and yet the very Maulana guy will be sitting in front of her talking to her. So and some of the Kabul guys, the journalists, they are wearing very casual clothes, shirt, and just like in Malaysia, you think he is a Malaysian. They don't mind. So you look at that behavior of theirs, they look quite open-minded. They are no more holding the rotan in their hand and beating people for not following their traditional clothing and so on. So this is what I'm saying.
So we can see some improvement in Taliban 2.0, so-called, Prof. Thank you so much, Prof, for your kind answer. And next question will go to Prof. Muhammad Nakib, saying that Prof has just mentioned in 1996, the Taliban have promised, but they broke it. What is your opinion? Do you think Taliban 2.0 also will break their promise when it's come to rights, women rights, minority rights, and right to work, and so on and so on? Will they be any different, Prof? Okay, I think Prof is not available right now. Then we move to.
Okay. I'm here. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Hassan. I think Taliban 2000, 10 and 20 are not much different. They are basically the same. The only thing is the 20 Taliban have, getting older, look older compared to what they looked in 1996. Yes, they are good in bringing security, physical security, but there are, physical security alone is not enough. I think what the Taliban of 20 has to do is to follow the existing laws of Afghanistan, win the heart of the people, because they are lacking right now national legitimacy, let alone international legitimacy. I fully agree with Prof. Dr. Hashim Kamali. the existing laws of Afghanistan, almost 95% of it are Islamic. And Prof. Kamali is one of the drafter of the 2004 constitution. And that constitution is actually an Islamic constitution, which is better than most of the constitution in the Muslim world. So what they have to do is, the laws are there. If there are sections of laws or maybe certain aspects of the law which they think are not in line with the Sharia, they may amend it. But basically, they have to follow the rule of law. They have to protect the dignity of every individual members of the society, which sadly right now, there are violations of human rights in Afghanistan. I mean, pointing a gun on the forehead of a woman who is just simply asking her right to work. I don't think we are sending a good image of a Muslim and Islamic government to the world. I think that is not right. So what the Taliban have to do is they have to respect the basic fundamental rights of the Afghan citizens, which are enshrined in the constitution. They don't have to follow other things. The constitution provides those rights. So basically protect those rights. And also they must have, they are saying by words that girls can go to school, women can go work, but until now women are not allowed to go to work, to attend to their jobs. Civil servants are, ladies are sitting at home, not able to go to their work. But saying is one thing and doing things is another. They are not putting in practice what they promise. This is not a good quality of you know what it has, what is the implication of it in Islam? A good Muslim will say something and do it. But they are saying something and they yet to put that into practice. So my advice, the Taliban of 2.0 should simply follow the constitution, the current constitution of Afghanistan, follow the current rule of law there, protect basic human rights of men and women and children, and that they should also have a clear foreign policy. Their foreign policy is not so clear. It is sad to see that some of the top officials of the Taliban are still in the terrorist watch list of the United Nations and other countries. So for them to be recognized internationally, they have to cut off relations with terrorist groups, which of course the Taliban say we don't have that relationship with any terrorist group, but they have to prove it, right? They have to prove it. They have to put things in action. And they must not allow Afghan territory to be used against another country. That is not good. We have to be at peace with ourselves and with the rest of the world if we want to be a respectable nation. So the Taliban, I believe, have a lot of homework to do. And if they, as Prof. Kamali mentioned, come out with the expectation of the people of Afghanistan and the expectation of the international community, they should be allowed to rule the country. And I would be the first to support them, I think. I hope I have answered the question.
Yes, Prof. Thank you so much for your wide-ranging answer. There are many more questions, but due to time constraint, in fact, we have come to 12:15, which we are planning to and the roundtable discussion. But anyway, please kindly allow me to pose just a few relevant questions to our distinguished panelists today, Prof. Dr. Muhammad Hashim Kamali. The question would be, Prof, what would be the way forward for Taliban to get the international recognition, and also whether they will be having some kind of inclusive government which respect the human rights? And also, if let's say the Taliban is internationally recognized, definitely, of course, they will be having a place in United Nations, right, Prof?
I think to be committed to Sharia, it does mean commitment to the rule of law. Sharia is the law. But Sharia has been evolved and regulated over time, over decades in Afghanistan, and our expectation of the Taliban would be to move with the gains of on the constitutional front, on human rights, on women's rights and their standings. In the economy, there is a lot of, there is no effective government. The demand now is for them to engage and regulate the country's affairs that are now, we don't have effective government right now. There is a gap. That is they must come out of this situation as fast as possible. And then not to think that they are free rangers, that they can make out of the legal system of Afghanistan what they think. No, we have worked on this for a century, and we have to observe and respect the gains, but there are other things that there is a lot of official corruption, for example. They were known for their 1996 to 2001. They did two good things. I think we know this. One was that they eliminated the opium cultivation and trade, and the other, they established security. People were, everywhere there was full security after Taliban. If they do those things, and I expect that they will probably do the same. And now you said that Taliban of that time are the same as Taliban of now. I think that they would themselves, I have heard one of them, Suhail Shaheen, that we have made mistakes. We have learned by our experience, and we want to do better. Those are the kind of ideas that came out of. Suhail Shaheen was interviewed by Yalda Hakim, and he said this. I think this is their mentality, not just one person, that they need to change and move along with the people's experiences with the gains of Afghanistan. I think they are not really, they should not think that they can do anything they want. They must be a responsible government. A responsible government is that engages with the people. They said that they will have a 12-person council, leading council, people, shura, that these people will be from different sectors of society. People thought that Karzai and Abdullah and one or two others will be sitting in this council. They said that it will be an inclusive government, and by this expression, people thought that this is what is meant. But now we don't see any sign of engaging outsiders from they have not brought in anyone from outside the Taliban themselves. This must change. And I think that their definition of emirate is not preferable to republic. Afghanistan was an Islamic republic, and the aspects of this regime are defined in the constitution in 2004. As you said, in this constitution, there are 17 references to Islam into Sharia. The first 3 articles commits the legal system of Afghanistan, in the country, in the people, to Sharia, to Islam, into the Mu'taqadat wa Ahkam. Mu'taqadat, the belief system of Islam, and Ahkam, the Sharia. These are the commitments. And the Sharia is a part of, our kind of national experience, our part of history and current society. And this was a step backwards from Republican to Emirate. I think that was a better way of, bringing people and their voices into the government. They talked of certain things at the beginning, but even those things, they are doing different things. So I hope that as time goes by, that they will show themselves in better light and move closer to Afghanistan, the good things that we have known, and not to be backward in their actions and their methods of government. And I think one of my expectation would be that they accept the rule of law, the existing constitution and laws. Of course, we are open to some changes if they have better things, but they must accept the existing system and the rule of law.
Thank you so much, Prof. It's very much eye-opening for the way forward in Afghan affairs. Ladies and gentlemen, we have now come to the end of our roundtable discussion today, and thank you so much for your kind participation. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and have a nice day ahead.
And this COVID times, I hardly see you. We can only see through this online, but that is better than nothing. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Thank you very much.
Walaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you so much.
Okay, you can.